Shalom and welcome to Shomer Mitzvot, Torah Observant, a series on practical Messianic living and apologetics. I'm the author, Torah Teacher Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. Torah observance is a matter of the heart. It always has been and always will be. The Torah proper instructed the people of Israel to love Adonai your God with all your heart, with all your being, and with all your resources. This is where Shomer Mitzvot begins, by loving Hashem and accepting Him on His terms. By this, I mean accepting His means of covenant obedience. For today, this means acceptance of Yeshua, His only Son, for Jew and non-Jew alike. Okay, welcome. I'll open with prayer and we'll get started. Avinu, Malkeinu, our Father, our King. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity to study. Thank you for the opportunity to come and to fellowship with one another, to bless one another, to turn to your word so that we may increase in our knowledge of you, so that we can also become better equipped to be able to witness for you, to give answers when questions are asked. Father, by the help of your Spirit, we are growing into the pattern of your Son Yeshua. We are being modeled after his lifestyle. We are taking on his lifestyle within us. We are crucifying the old man, and we're putting on the new man continually. And so that's why, Holy Spirit, we look to you, the one who wrote the Scriptures, the one who will explain and remind us of the words of the Master, Yeshua. Thank you, Father, for this awesome responsibility to be witnesses for you, to be ambassadors, to be your hands, to be your feet, to be your people. We don't take this responsibility lightly. And so we come together so that we can study to show ourselves approved. Thank you, Father, for your Passover season, for the special time that you have promised that you will meet with us, these dress rehearsals that point towards your Son. We know that as we continue to embrace them and to walk into them, that we will continually remind ourselves of the awesome ministry and the work that he is doing among us. Because though he died, he is yet living. And so the festivals and the signs still point to him. May we be bold in our witness as we encounter those who don't know you yet. Bless you, Lord, for all these things in Yeshua's name. Amen. Well, good evening. It's about 7 o'clock on a Monday evening. It is February 23rd, 2009. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. And this study is entitled Pesach, Season of Our Deliverance, or Pesach, Season of Our Freedom. And for the most part, we're talking about everything related to Passover. It's kind of a broad topical class. It covers lots of apologetic topics, meaning we deal with arguments for and against keeping the Passover and some of the issues related to Passover. But more importantly, the class is also designed to be a what's the word I want to use? A devotional class. In other words, Passover is about a month and a half away. Okay, about 6 weeks. It's April 8th, I want to say. April 6th, April 8th. And what I hope that this class will do is kind of prepare us as we move into the Passover season, as we prepare our hearts and prepare our minds and prepare our spirits to receive what God has to give to us on this Passover. I don't know about you, but every year as the festivals come around, as I cycle around, I take the theme of the festival, which in this case is deliverance, freedom. Now on a spiritual level, if you're like me, hopefully, prayerfully, you've already met your deliverer. You've already met your Redeemer. His name's Yeshua. And he's already set you personally free from your own personal slavery. That's step one of getting free in your life. But that's just the justification part. The Bible then goes on to describe a process of sanctification, which tends to be a lot longer process. So come on in if you haven't. You're welcome to join us. So justification is somewhat quick. The salvation process is very fast. It's designed to be fast. So it's not designed to take years and years for people to come to a decision as to whether or not Jesus is the Messiah. The paradigm described in the Torah, the paradigm laid out for us by the Passover picture, when after the we've got lots of people coming in today. I have to stop and recognize that this is my whole family coming in tonight. I've got, yes. Yeah, you may as well come on and fill up the back row there. My mother's here tonight. There's my father, my pops. My niece over there, my sister. And I saw my other sister. This is my brother-in-law right here holding the baby. So, to my knowledge, I think, is this your first time being in one of my class? No, maybe you've been in one or two. Been in a few? Okay. All right. Well, it's good to have you guys here. The class is about Passover. And I don't have a handout. The handout I gave you is really just where we were kind of going in previous classes. I may hand that out too because it may help. Maybe if someone else can hand a few more of these. Let's see. Maybe those. Thank you, Amy. So the class is about Passover. Passover carries with it a central theme of deliverance, obviously. Now, we know that when the children of Israel were set free from Egypt, that was not necessarily to be equated with their spiritual salvation. Being set free from Egypt doesn't mean they were saved. But the picture is demonstrated by their freedom. So God was painting a picture corporately with the children of Israel, teaching us individually that what he did for the children of Israel on a corporate level, he wants to do for every one of us, including them, on an individual level. He wants to reach into our own personal Egypt, and if we will allow him, set us free. And the requirements haven't changed one bit. Faith in the blood of the Lamb. Same concept. It's not a physical lamb these days. It's the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. So that's where we're kind of going to go with some of our discussions. Thus, as Passover approaches this year, if you've already been set free from your own personal Egypt, if you're already accepting Yeshua as your salvation, then what areas of your life are you looking to be sanctified in? What areas of your life are you looking to be continually set free in? If you're like many believers, you'll find that if you look inside, you're going to find there are some things that are still representative strongholds, as it were, or maybe habits or thought patterns or behaviors that are really remnants of the old man lurking around, lingering around. The old man who's already been crucified in the spirit and in the spiritual truth. He's already been crucified, so he's dead, but he hasn't gotten the signal that he's dead. And maybe a good example is after World War II was over and the good guys won, right? Or the United States was on the team that won. The Allied forces, as they went throughout the Asian Pacific region, they found pockets of, I'm going to use the air quotes, enemy troops that were still hiding out in locations who hadn't got the news that the war was over and we had won. And what ended up happening is those U.S. troops that went into those isolated areas met with resistance from those enemy troops. Those enemy troops had been dispatched from their homeland and stationed themselves in places where they would fight the U.S. forces. But once the war was over, they didn't get the news that the war was over and that we had won. And they hadn't gotten news from their homeland that the war was over either. So from as far as they were concerned, the war was still on, and they were still receiving orders from their commander-in-chief, who was the enemy, according to the U.S. But the U.S. had won, so there was a new commander-in-chief. And so these U.S. forces had to go into these pocket areas. This is a true story, by the way. These U.S. forces had to go into these pocket areas and kind of convince them, look, the war's over. There's a new commander-in-chief. You guys need to lay down your arms. There's no war. You're fighting an empty fight. You're done. It's done. The war is finished, and our side won. Your side lost or surrendered. And you need to lay down your arms. This is kind of representative of the old man inside of us. Once we get saved, there's like areas of our life that don't realize that the war is over and that the new commander-in-chief is Yeshua. So they still put up a fight. They're like, no, I'm gonna have my own way. They need to come under. They need to come into submission with the new man. That's why God allows us to go through Passover year after year. That sanctification cycle is still available at this time of year. The same spirit that permeates this season to set people free from sin for the first time is the same person, same spirit that is empowering us to continue to be set free in stages of sanctification. Does that make crystal clear sense to everyone in this room? Okay, great. All right, let's pause there and jump into some liturgy. I'm going to read Exodus chapter 13, verses 1 through 16, like I usually do. I'm sorry, 1 through 16. And I'll do like I did before. I'll read the Hebrew, and then I'll read English, and then I'll read Hebrew, then I'll read English. So Exodus 13, verses 1 through 16. This is our Passover passage. I'll also bring in again the Leviticus 23 passage. Exodus 13, verse 1. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, verse 2, Kadesh li chol bechor peter kol rechem bivnei Yisrael ba'adam uvbehema lihu. Sanctify unto me all the firstborn, whatsoever openeth the womb among the children of Israel, both man and of beast, is mine. Verse 3. Vayomer Moshe el ha'am, zochor et hayom hazeh, asher yitzatem mimitzraim mi beit avadim. Ki b'chozek yad hotzi Adonai etchem, mizeh v'lo yelchei chametz. And Moses said unto the people, remember this day in which ye came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. For by strength of hand the Lord brought you out from this place, and there shall no leavened bread be eaten. Verse 4. Hayom atem yotzim b'chodesh ha'aviv. This day ye go forth in the month Aviv. Verse 5. V'haya chi yivi'acha Adonai el eretz ha-Kanaani v'ha-Chiti v'ha-Emori v'ha-Chivi v'ha-Yevusi asher nishba la'avotecha latet lech eretz zavach chalav udvash v'avata et ha'avodah hazot b'chodesh hazeh. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanite, and the Hittite, and the Amorite, and the Hivite, and the Jebusite, which he swore unto thy fathers to give thee, a land flowing with milk and honey, thou shalt keep this service in this month. Verse 6. Shivat yamim tochal matzot uviyom hashvi'i chag la'Adonai. 7 days thou shalt eat unleavened bread, and in the seventh day shall be a feast to the Lord. Verse 7. Matzot yelchel et shivat hayamim, v'lo yira'e lecha chametz, v'lo yira'e lecha se'ur, b'kol guvlecha. Unleavened bread shall be eaten throughout the 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with thee, neither shall there be leaven seen with thee in all thy borders. Verse 8. V'higadta levincha bayom hahu lemor, ba'avur zeh asa Adonai li b'tzeiti mimitzraim. And thou shalt tell thy son in that day, saying, it is because of thee that the Lord did for me when I came forth out of Egypt. Verse 9. V'haya lecha leot al yadcha ulzicharon bein einaka lema'an tisheh torat Adonai b'ficha ki b'yad chazaka hotziacha Adonai mimitzraim. And it shall be for a sign upon thee, upon thy hand, and for a memorial between thine eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in thy mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord brought thee out of Egypt. Verse 10. V'shemarta et ha'huka hazot lemoadah miyamim yamima. Thou shalt therefore keep this ordinance in its season from year to year. Verse 11. V'haya ki yavi'acha Adonai el eretz ha-kinaani ka'asher nishba lecha v'la'avotecha untana lach. And it shall be when the Lord shall bring thee into the land of the Canaanite, as he swore unto thee and to thy fathers, and shall give it thee. Verse 12. V'ha'avarta kol peter lechem la'Adonai, v'chol peter sheger behima, asher yiyeh lecha hazkarim la'Adonai. That thou shalt set apart unto the Lord all that openeth the womb, every firstling that is a male, which thou hast coming of a beast, shall be the Lord's. Verse 13. V'chol peter chamor tifdeh beseh, v'im lo tifdeh v'araf to, v'chol b'chor adam b'vanecha tifdeh. And every firstling of an ass thou shalt redeem with a lamb, and if thou wilt not redeem it, then thou shalt break its neck. And all of the firstborn of man among thy sons shalt thou redeem. Verse 14. V'haya ki yish'alcha v'necha machar lemor mazot. Va'amarta elive b'chozech yad hotzianu Adonai mi Mitzrayim mi beit avadim. And it shall be when thy son asketh thee in time to come, saying, what is this? Speaking of the Passover, what is this? That thou shalt say unto him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, from the house of bondage. Verse 15. Vayahi ki hiksha paro l'sholchinu vayacharog Adonai kol b'chor be'eretz Mitzrayim mi b'chor adam va'ad b'chor behima va'al kain ani zovech le'Adonai kol peter lechem hazkarim v'chol b'chor b'nai efdeh. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh would hardly let us go, that the Lord slew all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of beast. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all that openeth the womb, being males, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. And the final pasuk, the final verse, verse 16. V'haya le'ot al yadcha ultotafot bein einecha ki b'chozech yad hotzianu Adonai miMitzrayim. And it shall be for a sign upon thy hand, and for frontlets between thine eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought us forth out of Egypt. End. FYI, we are going to watch a Passover film. I was going to watch it tonight, but I couldn't get the TV and the VCR because I didn't reserve them in time. We're going to watch this film. It's called Messiah Revealed. Messiah, Messiah, the Prophecy Revealed, something like that. It's about a 45-minute film. It's taken from a first century Passover perspective. It's a recreation, obviously, but it's put on by a Messianic group. And so the terms they use in there, they use Yeshua in the story. And the general plot of the story is that you have a first century Israeli family going through a Passover, and they discuss this concept of, is this Jesus character, is he the Messiah? So this Passover takes place either the same year that Yeshua died, or it may have been 1 year later. But either way, Yeshua's already come, died, resurrected, and gone on, because one of the characters in the family is kind of talking and challenging the other members of the family about this Yeshua character. And so it's an interesting story. I think you guys will like it. It's very well put together. It's not kind of hokey. I think they did really good on it. The music and the dramatization and the outfits look fairly authentic. It wasn't put on like by a drama team, like by a church or something like that. It's actually a professionally made movie. It looks nice. So I'll bring that for you next week, and then I'm going to play it again sometime in March as we get closer to the Passover, probably third week in March, sometime around then. So if you miss it next week, then be sure and watch it the second showing, and I'll show it again. So that'll be a good time to get together. Let's talk about this Passover. Let's talk about this festival. Let me turn to Leviticus chapter 23, and I want to emphasize something I'd mentioned last week about the connection between the Passover and Sabbath, because this goes a long way in helping us to internalize the concept of freedom and the deliverance that Passover is. You all know that Passover only comes around once a year. But in Leviticus chapter 23, we have an outline of the festivals, particularly the first The first 8 verses, the first 8 Pasukim. Leviticus chapter 23. I'll use the same format I used a moment ago. I'll read the Hebrew and then I'll read the English. And then I'm going to go and tell you why I wanted to go here. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor, verse 1. And the Lord spoke unto Moses, saying, verse 2. Daber el bnei Yisrael va'amarta alehem, modai Adonai asher tikra'u otam, mikra'e kodesh, elehem, modai. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, the appointed seasons of the Lord, which ye shall proclaim to be holy convocations, even these are my appointed seasons. Verse 3. Sheshet yadmim teaseh melacha uvyom hashvi'i Shabbat Shabbaton mikra kodesh kol melacha lo ta'asu Shabbat hi la'Adonai b'chol moshvotechem. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. Shall do no manner of work. It is a Sabbath unto the Lord in all your dwellings. Verse 4. Eleh muadei Adonai mikra'e kodesh, asher tikra'u otam b'moadam. These are the appointed seasons of the Lord, even holy convocations, which ye shall proclaim in their appointed seasons. Verse 5. B'chodesh harishon ba'arba'a asa la chodesh bein ha'arba'im Pesach la'Adonai. In the first month, on the 14th day of the month at dusk, is the Lord's Passover. Verse 6. Uva'chamisha asa yom lechadot. Let's try that again. Yom la chodesh hazeh chag hamatzot la'Adonai shivat yamim matzot toachlu. And on the 15th day of the same month is a feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. Verse 7. B'yom harishon mikra kodesh yiyeh lachem kol malachet avodah lo ta'asu. In the first day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall do no manner of servile work. And then the final verse, verse 8. V'hi krav tem asher la'Adonai shivat yamim bayom hashvi'i mikra kodesh kol melechet avodah lo ta'asu. And ye shall bring an offering made by fire unto the Lord 7 days. And in the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall do no manner of servile work. In these passages, we see God first introducing this concept of, these are my appointments. Now, the Hebrew word for appointments is moed, M-O-E-Y-D, if I were to write it using transliterated English. Moed. And this means really an appointment, but by implication, the modern Hebrew word is that this is a dress rehearsal. A dress rehearsal. So it's neat that this concept of moed, of appointment, carries the modern Hebrew term dress rehearsal. It's an appointment of God. He's the boss. We're the employees. He sets the time. We agree. So God says, pull out your calendars, Israel. These are the days that I'm going to meet with you on. You meet me because I'm setting the appointment. We're going to get together. It establishes authority right up front. God said, these are the appointed days, and I want you, Israel, to manage these. I want you to make sure that these are on your calendar so that we can get together. But the modern Hebrew term dress rehearsal is interesting because we know from looking back in 20th century Christian hindsight that the festivals all point towards the work of Yeshua, the Messiah. So the Passover feast that Hashem, that God was establishing with Israel 3,500 years ago, was to point forward to the finished work that Messiah would accomplish on the cross anyway, as he became the Passover lamb. So it's interesting that as they rehearsed year after year, they would be better prepared when the final real play hit the stage. You know, it's just like any play. If you go through the dress rehearsals and you play your parts, you learn your cues. And you learn the cues of the other players. And the play goes along in such a way so that when the time comes for the final true performance, the actors don't have a problem because they've been doing what? They've been rehearsing correctly. That makes sense, right? So Israel, by rehearsing these festivals, when the time came 1,500 years later for Yeshua to enact the real deal, should they have missed it or should they have gotten it? What do you think? They should have gotten it because they have been rehearsing. What would happen if they hadn't failed to rehearse? Are they going to know their parts? No. Are they going to know the cues? No. So God set this in motion for a reason. That's why he says in verse 2, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, the appointed seasons of the Lord. The appointed seasons of the Lord. Moadei Adonai. The dress rehearsals of the Lord. These are my festivals, which you will proclaim to be holy convocations. Even these are my appointed seasons. So right in verse 2, we see that the old notion that these feasts are feasts of the Jews is a misnomer. Whose festivals are they? They're the Lord's. Israel, these are my feasts. You do them, I'm going to loan them out to you. I want you to walk into them. And then God gives this overview of these are my festivals. And then he drops down in the very next verse, verse 3, with 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is the Sabbath of solemn rest. And he starts talking about this Sabbath. But then he moves straight from the Sabbath into verse 5 and 6, and he starts talking about the Passover. And I was thinking, is there any connection between the two? Yes, there is. Having looked at this passage where he talks about talks about Sabbath first, and then he talks about Passover. Turn in your Bible to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Let me bring it up on my computer here. I'm reading the 1917 Jewish Publication Society. Yeah, it's almost 100 years old. Sorry. I pulled it down offline. I actually downloaded it. I don't know how good your eyes are, but I'm reading an interlinear version, meaning I've got the Hebrew on this side and the English on the other. And it's accessible by computer, so I can jump anywhere in the entire Tanakh electronically straight to where I want to go. I pulled it down out of, what is the website? I'll have to get that to you later. I forgot off the top of my head. I'm not actually online. You can download it to your computer. Or in my case, I saved the web pages. So, what's that? It's not actually eSword, no. No, it's actually a website. eSword is a Christian publication. This is a Jewish publication. It's not even a Christian, yeah. You know what? Just FYI for the website, it's www.mechon dash mamre mamre.org. mamre.org. Mamre, like the oaks of Mamre. Dash, yeah, not an underscore, but a hyphen or dash, yeah. So www.mechon-mamre.org, and you can read the entire Masoretic text plus Hebrew with the JPS 1917 edition, which I'm reading. Yes. Yeah. I don't know how many people actually want to write it down, but okay, I'll put it out there. That's it. And you'll have to put the www. W3. That's my abbreviation of www. Okay. All right. W to the third power. Right? All right. So, Deuteronomy chapter 5, and starting in verse Merchon. Merchon. Deuteronomy chapter 5, starting in look at verse 11. This, of course, is the second listing of the Ten Commandments, right? The first list is found in Exodus chapter 20, verses 1 through whatever, and this is the second list. What's interesting about the two lists is that Moshe gives a slightly different listing, and in the first version, he explains something, as in the second version, he picks up and explains a little more. And in the first version, in Exodus chapter 20, the reason given for observing the Sabbath, in other words, God says, you shall therefore keep the Sabbath, and he says, because, and in Exodus, he says, because in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, and then the seventh day he rested, therefore keep the Sabbath as a sign of his creatorship. So Sabbath keeping in Exodus is described as, our recognizing that God is the authority who created everything. He's the creator. This is the signature of his creation. The Sabbath is his signature, and therefore we keep the Sabbath, and in doing so, we proclaim that he is, in fact, the creator who worked and then rested. And that's what the Exodus passage outlines. But interestingly, if we go to the Deuteronomy passage, starting in verse 11, Shemor et yom hashabat lakadsho ka'asher Sivka Adonai Elohecha. Observe the Sabbath day to keep it holy as the Lord thy God commanded thee. Sheshet yamim ta'avod va'asit chol malachtecha. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. I won't read the Hebrew for the third thing. But the seventh day is the Sabbath unto the Lord thy God. In it thou shalt not do any manner of work. And it talks about everybody in your camp not doing it. But look at verse 14. And thou shalt remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt. Notice no mention of the creation now. You were a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God brought thee out hence with a mighty hand and mine outstretched arms. What event is he describing? Which festival? Pesach. And the Lord thy God brought thee out hence with a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore, look at the connector, key in Hebrew. Therefore, the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep the Sabbath day. It's almost like there's a typo. It's like he should say, and the verse 14 should read, when I say a typo, obviously I'm being funny, but it seems like it should read, and thou shalt therefore remember that thou wast a servant in the land of Egypt, and the Lord thy God brought thee out from thence with a mighty hand and by an outstretched arm. Therefore the Lord thy God commanded thee to keep Passover. That would seem more like natural, that's how it should read, right? But he says, therefore the Lord thy God commanded to keep Sabbath. See how this verse is tying Sabbath in with Passover. And we just saw the two mentioned in the Leviticus passage back to back. As the festivals unfold before us, the first one is the Sabbath or the weekly Sabbath, and then the yearly ones are outlined by the Passover. So here's what I want you to understand. Here's why I'm going in this direction. As Passover is celebrated on an annual basis, so Sabbath is celebrated on a weekly basis. And Sabbath becomes the micro, and Passover becomes the macro. And they have a relationship one to another. So that the weekly Sabbath reminds us of the annual Passover. And the annual Passover reminds us of the weekly Sabbath. And they're tied together. And they're tied together nicely by the theme of freedom. Makes perfect sense, right? The Sabbath is the picture of rest. Rest from what? Rest from sin and shame. Rest from slavery. God says, I delivered you from the land of slavery, from the house of bondage. Therefore, keep my Sabbath. Therefore, keep the Passover. So they're tied together. If you don't know God in his Sabbath rest, you won't be able to keep the Passover correctly. To be sure, children of Israel weren't keeping the Sabbath when they were in Egypt. Were they? No. Egypt is a picture of sin. Egypt is a type of slavery. The true servant of the Lord is free to serve the Lord. Let's remind ourselves about the story in Passover again. God says to Moses, tell Pharaoh. You guys all saw the Cecil B. DeMille version, the Ten Commandments, right? I was with my parents here as my witness. I watched that thing every year. It came on whenever it came on, year after year, whatever, right? Charlton Heston and the Ten Commandments, right? Moses, he's up there. That was great. I remember since I was that little watching this show. Moses goes into Pharaoh, who was what? Who's that guy? Yul Brynner. Yeah, great Pharaoh, wasn't he? Moses says, "Let my people go." But what else did he say? So that they may serve me. Right. The implication is that slaves don't have the freedom to serve the master as they wish. God, looking into Israel's situation, realized, they can't serve me because they're enslaved. They can't serve me because Egypt is taking all of their time and attention and all their resources from them. They're swallowing them up. And they're breaking their backs. So God sent Moses, the type of Messiah, to free the people out of Egypt, but not just to set them loose and go, okay, you're free. Have fun. See ya. What did God do? He set them free so that they could do what? Worship God, right. In other words, Mark would say it this way, he brought them out in order to bring them in. So between Egypt and the Promised Land, what was there? A lot of elements. There was the Red Sea, there was Mount Sinai, there was the desert. But eventually they're going from Egypt to the land of promise. So they're going from one land to another land. But they're going from slavery to freedom. They're going from being in bondage to being set free, but not just set free so they can do their own thing, but free to worship God. And between those two lands, the Torah comes in as the mechanism that teaches them how to worship the God that they're going to go on to live with. In this week's Torah portion, coming up this Shabbat, this week's Torah portion starts in Exodus chapter 25. The book of Exodus is about 40 chapters long. So if we neatly divide it in two, it's about 20 and 20. We're right now around the middle part of Exodus. Do you know that from now to the end of Exodus, what topic occupies the rest of the book, which is nearly half the book of Exodus? Anyone want to take a guess? From chapter 25 to the rest of the end of the chapter. You guys know what topic occupies? The tabernacle, the building of the tabernacle. Why? What does God say in Exodus chapter 25, verse 8? You guys know? Yeah, let's look it up. Exodus chapter 25, verse 8. And let them make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. Va'asu li mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham. Make me a sanctuary that I may dwell among them. So how come God didn't have them build the tabernacle in Egypt? That doesn't make any sense. Pharaoh wouldn't allow it. Do you think Pharaoh would have that? Hey, Pharaoh, is it okay if I move in? God says, build a little tabernacle in my midst. My people will take a break from work every now and then and come worship me. You think Pharaoh would have gone for that? No. The Pharaoh had one thing on his mind. Me. Me. So, it says in the text they're building cities for pharaohs because the pharaohs thought that they were gods. So God realized that no, this isn't going to work until I set my people free. And once I set them free, I'm going to bring them into my land, the land I promised to give their forefathers. And they're going to build a tabernacle so that I can dwell with them, so that we can live together. So we're beginning to see that this whole Passover picture, this orientation towards freedom, is captured in these themes. Now, again, personally speaking, there are probably people in this room who are saying, but Ariel, I'm not Jewish. I wasn't in Israel. I wasn't in Egypt. I wasn't in the desert. I wasn't at Sinai. What does this have to teach? What does this have to do with me? Well, the writers of the apostolic scriptures, what we commonly call the New Testament, they did feel that they were connected to Israel. And why? Because they realized that they were the offspring of the promises given to the forefathers, both physically but also spiritually. They realized that when Yeshua came to Israel, he didn't just come to Israel to deliver Israel, but that like the paradigm of old, he came into Israel and opened the door for anyone to come out and come in to the promised land. So let's go backwards again. Go back to history. Back at the Passover, on the 10th plague, when Moshe is having the firstborn slain, and then finally that was it, Pharaoh's back was broken, and the bonds were broken, and the people were actually thrusted out of Egypt. Was it Israel that went out? Was it the sons of Jacob who went out? Who else went out? Some Egyptians. In other words, whoever put the blood on the door, the posts, and the lintels was able to go out. Did God cut a covenant with their forefathers? I didn't think so. But yet at that moment he said, if you do what I'm telling, because Moshe speaking, if you do what I'm telling my children to do, you can come out too. Question. People who lost firstborn sons, didn't put the blood, meaning they still had a chance to maybe get out. In reality, they probably could have. In the mass confusion, the mass exodus, they probably could have gotten out too. Nevertheless, that would have been the exception, not the rule. Still, the rule was God was teaching through a word picture. And there's always exceptions that we don't quite figure out. And so your question about people who got out but didn't put place the blood on the lamb. Yeah, there probably were people. Just like there were probably people who placed the blood on the lamb, blood of the lamb on the doorpost, got out and maybe turned around the next day and went right back. We don't read about them either. In other words, we kind of assume that everybody who placed the blood. You were supposed to, because that was the sign that the destroyer would pass over your home. But the destroyer was actually was killing the firstborn. Right. And so that's why, that was one of the reasons why the destroyer was come. Plus, the whole word pictures, the blood on the blood on the doors. In fact, we can just go there. Exodus chapter 12. Look at verse 23. I'm sorry. The one I want to see is earlier on, is in verse 13. We could back up to verse 12 if we want to. For I will go through the land of Egypt, God says, in that night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. Against all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. Verse 13. And the blood shall be for you a token. Some of your verses say a sign. The Hebrew word is oat. Shall be for you an oat upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I'll pass over you, and there shall be no plague be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. So your question as to whether or not they didn't have to put the blood on the doors to get out of Egypt, it's possible, but it wasn't the picture that he was trying to paint anyway. In other words, the argument from silence can actually go both ways. The text doesn't say that he did let them out. In probability, he probably did. In all probability, he probably let them out. But the picture that's being painted here is obviously pointing towards Yeshua. So with Yeshua being the lamb now, whose blood gets applied to our individual hearts, without Yeshua, can we really be set free? No. So on the individual level, it fails. But since this is simply a corporate picture, we could probably see some of the exceptions. Did that help to answer the question? The corporate picture, again, even those who placed the blood on the doorpost physically, and they got out of Egypt that day and made their way to Sinai and received the tablets and went on to go into the land. In fact, we know for sure that most of them didn't make it into the land. Why not? Because their faith proved to be spurious. Even though they went through all of that, when they got out to the desert, they doubted God, and the proof of their doubt was seen in their actions and their lack of faith, and therefore God judged them and killed them in the desert. Does that mean they weren't saved? We could start asking all kinds of interesting philosophical questions. Obviously, some of them were. Someone who got saved but didn't make it into the land. But the corporate picture is still being painted, and the corporate picture is what is the main meat of the whole discussion, is that the blood represents the sign that God will spare or pass over that house and not destroy the inhabitant of the house. On a corporate level, that's the picture being painted. On an individual level, there's little, if no, leeway given. True? Because Yeshua says explicitly, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father except by me. So we know on an individual level, there's no leeway. Did that help answer the question, kind of? It's a good philosophical question. Well, the corporate picture of them leaving Egypt is still that God reached into their situation and made it so that they could leave. In other words, we could actually spin, I'm not saying that it's your argument, but for the sake of the class right now, we could actually spin your argument. We could say, if that's the case, why didn't they leave a week earlier? How about a month earlier? In other words, there seems to be some factors in place that they weren't getting out until God opened the doors.
Right, I understand.
True. So in some senses, but even that being the case, there probably were some people who got out even before then. Some people probably got out maybe after the first plague, when the whole confusion's taking place. This whole showdown between Moshe and Pharaoh at the first plague. Center stage, Egypt is in ruins. Especially by the time you get to the frogs and all that stuff. If I were in Egypt by that point in time, I probably would have taken advantage and got out then. At least tried to get out before they even word of this 10th plague. But God knew in advance that he was going to send the 10th plague. He told Moshe way back in Exodus chapter 3, I'm going to kill the firstborn of Egypt. He told him way back then. God knew that was going to happen. So that's kind of interesting. Yeah. And the point is, the Torah is teaching, the Torah is just giving us the overview. It doesn't afford us all the individual, say, scenarios. It's a good discussion nevertheless. Let's go on. The point I'm trying to get us to see in this class is that, back to that principle of moed, even though we've been set free, when we now get to the subsequent passages from Exodus forward, we get to Leviticus, we get to Deuteronomy, God still gets mileage out of getting Israel to understand that an event that took place years past is important enough to be retold year after year. Thus, I read the Exodus 13 passage where year after year you're to keep this festival. And year after year you're to tell of my deliverance. Why do you guys think that is? Does God just want to make sure they don't forget? What do you think he's pointing towards? What do you think he's aiming at? What do you think he's getting at? When he declared himself to the nation of Israel. The title that God gives to himself, the God who delivered you from the house of house of Israel. I'm sorry, let me just pull it up here. Exodus 13 verse 9 is one place we see it. And it shall be for thee a sign upon thy hand and for a memorial between thine eyes. This is Exodus 13, verse 9. That the law of the Lord may be in thy mouth. For, or because, this connecting phrase, ki in Hebrew, ki b'yad chazakah hotzi'acha Adonai mimitzrayim. For with a strong hand the Lord hath brought thee out of Egypt. And then we drop down to verse 14, and we see it again. When the son asks you in the time to come, what is this? Speaking about with the Passover. Thou shalt say to him, by strength of hand the Lord brought us out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage. We have that same wording again. B'chozek yad hotzi'anu Adonai mimitzrayim mi-beit avadim. And then finally again in verse 16, and it shall be for a sign upon thy hand and frontlets between thy eyes, for by strength of hand the Lord brought you forth out of Egypt. So this I am the God who brought you out of Egypt, now suddenly turn to Exodus chapter 20. And look at verse 1. This is familiar territory for most of us. Exodus 20 verse 1. Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe. Vayidaber Elohim et kol hadvarim ha'elei lemor. And God spoke all these words saying, Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotzeiticha me eretz mitraim mi beit avadim. What's that? I am the Lord thy God who what? Who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. It's almost like his reputation. It's like his nickname. He's the God that brought us out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. He wants us to remember this title of his. It becomes a title. Becomes a working, functioning title. And so this Exodus from Egypt becomes hugely important for God. Obviously, individually, it speaks to our personal freedom from sin. But corporately, ask yourself the question real quick. Who were these commandments given to? Corporate Israel? Yes? Yes? Is Israel around today? They better be, because God said that promised to Abraham that your seed won't ever disappear. So if Israel disappears, then God's a liar. So yes, Israel's still around. But is corporate Israel delivered from the land of Egypt? Yes, they are. But have they been delivered from their personal Egypt? Corporately? No. Therefore, they still need a Passover. They still need a corporate Passover. And if we had the time, we could go into some prophetic scriptures that where God promises that the second Exodus will be greater than the first Exodus. What second Exodus? The Exodus coming back into the land, the Exodus of corporately coming out of their sin. One day Israel will recognize their Messiah corporately. And then they will finally be out of Egypt corporately. Of course, we know that all Israel shall be saved in Romans chapter 11. Doesn't mean every single Israelite. We could argue that theologically as well. But the point is, corporately speaking, the picture is still there. So, let's go with application. It's about 7:45, and I'm just going to turn to practical application. Practical application. If you don't know Yeshua tonight, you should really consider taking him up on his offer to come out of Egypt. Personally. Yes? If you don't know him, you should take up his offer to come out of Egypt. He's still the same deliverer and Messiah that sets people free. You don't have to wait for Passover. That's the beautiful thing, right? You don't have to wait till Passover to accept Yeshua as your Messiah. You can accept him when the opportunity presents itself. But that's personal. Once God sets you free personally, your application now extends corporately. You join an existing body after you come into Messiah. You join an existing people group. Who's the people group? Who do you join? Do you join the church? Some people would say yes. If we define the church as remnant Israel, then oh yeah, you bet we join the church. In other words, we got this big circle over here called Israel. And inside this big circle, we've got Jews and we've got Gentiles. But inside this big circle, we've got a smaller circle that is actually the remnant. Why are they the remnant? Because they actually know God and God knows them. God dwells with them and they dwell with God. And they're the remnant because throughout Israel's history, she walked away from God so many times that God had to put her out of the land, at least twice, right? Israel gets booted out, and she loses her corporate identity a few times. In fact, northern Israel doesn't even know who they are, right? But Israel gets displaced from their land. But because God made an eternal covenant with Abraham, that I will continue to bless your offspring, Genesis 12:1 through 3, I will bless those that bless you and curse those that curse you, and through you all the nations of the earth will be blessed. Therefore, there is always going to be a remnant, no matter what age from Abraham's day till now. There's always been a faithful remnant that God keeps and preserves because they keep their faith in God. And there's a genuine relationship between the two. So Israel has never, ever ceased to be, according on the remnant level. These people out here, they come and go. In other words, they may say they're Israel, but when the time comes, when the judgment day comes, if they don't really know God, this will amount for nothing. So Israel is comprised of a larger circle that has a bunch of people and a smaller remnant. When someone way out here comes to believe in Yeshua, he places his faith in Yeshua, this gives him access to the remnant of Israel. He gets grafted into the remnant of Israel. Who is the remnant of Israel? Can you guys see that there's a letter C inside that? That's the church. The true church. Not the spurious church who says they are believers, shows up on Sunday, stays for 10 minutes, throws a dime in the offering plate, thinks they've done God a favor. That's not the church. The church is made up of people who really know God and God really knows them. That's the remnant church, the true church. Mark calls it the church triumphant. I simply call it the remnant Israel. So remnant Israel is the church, and the church is remnant Israel. So we could argue that both ways. Let's go back to practical application. If remnant Israel is truly the church, then why isn't the church corporately embracing the festivals? This is their identity. They're Israel. But they don't understand they're Israel. Because God has how many brides? One. So if Israel's the bride if Israel's the bride of God, but the church is the bride of Messiah, and Messiah is God incarnate, who's the bride? It's Israel. Obviously. God didn't divorce Israel to marry the church. There's no such thing. Is that making a little more sense now? So practical application. Once you come to faith in Messiah, the festivals become yours. So when we go back to these passages, let's round out by going back to Leviticus. Chapter 23. And look again. And the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Vayidaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. Speak unto whom? Daber el B'nai Yisrael. Who are the sons of Israel? Remnant also. So the church, by inclusion, must be keeping the festivals because God is speaking to them here. You are my sons. There's only one God, Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. And He is the God of us. He is our God. He recognizes us as a collective group, and we recognize Him as the only God there is. So, unbelieving Israel out of here, they worship the same God that the remnant Israel worships. The big difference? God can see into the hearts of those who are out here, who are part of corporate Israel, who don't yet know the Messiah of Israel, and therefore are on a path to meet the Messiah. They're still walking in the festivals, and that's good, because that's intellectual nutrition. But one day they're going to have to contend with this person up here. In the meantime, the remnant should be keeping the festivals, because that's their heritage, and that's their legacy, and that's their commandment. Not only is He telling them, but He's telling the future generations as well. Good question. Her question is there still a mixed multitude and then Israel? Do you guys understand her question? Let's go back to the Exodus then real quick. God opens the doors of Egypt and allows anyone and everyone to come out who at still some level is orienting themselves towards going with Moses. Otherwise, at Egypt's level, I presume that those who tried to get out but didn't follow Moses, the stragglers, Egypt probably caught up with them and killed them or overtook them. But at some point, we're talking about people who left Egypt as a group. This people group that left Egypt, from the time they left Egypt, they're comprised of sons of Jacob, that is to say, offspring of Jacob the man. So it's this extended family that's coming out. But at the same time, the mixed multitude is the groups of clans who did not have direct clanship to Jacob. They didn't have direct kinship to Jacob. They were not distant cousins of Jacob. They were from other countries at all. There were whole mixed people who were watching this whole showdown between Moses and Pharaoh, a.k.a. God and Satan, front row. And when the time came, they went with God. They decided to go with Moses. So the multitude that came out of Egypt was the mixed multitude. When I say mixed, it's mixed of, if I could import a term, it's mixed of Jews and non-Jews. Or it's mixed of Jacobites and non-Jacobites. That's the mixed multitude. They all travel through the Red Sea and end up at Sinai. When they get to Sinai, God gathers them all together. He didn't say, okay, let's segregate here. Jacobites on this side, the rest of you here. He didn't do that. They all come together at Sinai, and God cuts a covenant with the whole lot of them. And in doing so, He calls them all Israel. Therefore, He is collectively not only saving those who were not tied family-wise to Jacob, but also He's bringing them into the covenant. The proof is in the two spies. We'll just even go at that level. The two spies are who? There were 12 spies, and 2 were faithful and 10 were unfaithful. Who were the 2 that were faithful? Caleb and Joshua. What tribe was Joshua from? Let's look it up. Let me just tell you this much. Caleb was not an Israelite. So it's kind of nice. You're like, he refers almost as... Now, he wasn't an Israelite then, but by virtue of coming under the covenant with Israel, he became an Israelite. But God's trying to send a message to those from the nations. When He uses the term "those from the nations," the Hebrew is goyim or ger. I see some people, my niece over there back. We must be at the 5-minute mark. These people groups from outside of the clanship of Israel are being brought near to Israel to join Israel and become part of Israel. That's what Romans 11 is all about, this whole olive tree theology. There's one tree called Israel, and there are other trees called the nations. And the branches get broken off out of there and get grafted into this tree. Thus, Israel becomes their identity.
If I was in Egypt at the time of the Passover, and I was not
Of Jacob, of offspring, yes.
And I put blood on my door,
yes.
I would not have been called a child of Israel. I would have been...
But that's okay because they weren't called Jews either. So the terms are irrelevant. It's the identity that matters. If you would have left with... Yeah. If you would have left and followed through and landed at Sinai, then you would be called Israel. Well, the term, if we want to get technical with the term, because then they were still Israel. Yeah. Why the mixed multitude? Don't put too much into it. The mixed multitude is quite simply those who were. Well, it's mixed. It's mixed of what? Mixed nationals. People, a multinational group. That's all we mean when we say mixed multitude. A multinational group that came out, so that it's the paradigm. Remember the corporate pictures being painted. Salvation, which is being demonstrated here, is not seen to be exclusively for one national group. God saves anyone, which is true. That's the paradigm that's being painted by the mixed multitude coming out. God's trying to let everyone know, I can save anyone who follows through with my requirements, which is to place the blood on the doorposts of their heart. I'll pull that person out of Egypt just as fast as I'll pull the person that I actually cut a covenant with his fathers. So that's good. Are you in my food class? All right. We're gonna talk a little bit more. I hope you guys stay around for my food class too. It's about 7:58, and so those of you who need to leave and pick up children and things like that, feel free to go. I'll give a general dismissal, and then at 8 o'clock we'll come back and we're going to talk about food. We're going to talk about what is food, what's not, and why. So let me close real quick. Father, I thank you for the opportunity to stand before the students and teach, and I realize that the topics can be challenging for me as well. And so I ask you, Father, to continue to mold us and to shape us and to enlarge our capacity to comprehend these things. Help us to realize that you are meeting us. And if we will set our calendars with your calendars, we'll meet you too. But if we miss out, it's our fault, Abba. It's our fault because we're not looking for the opportunity to come together with you. So draw us close to you in perfect fellowship. And we'll be careful to give you the praise in Yeshua's name. Amen.
That concludes our show for today. It is my desire that this continuing series of teachings will assist the average non-Jewish believer or new Messianic Jewish believer in his desire to become a more mature child of God. And now, O Israel, what does the Lord your God ask of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all his ways, to love him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, and to observe the Lord's commands and decrees that I am giving you today for your own good. To the Lord your God belong the heavens, even the highest heavens, the earth, and everything in it. Yet the Lord set his affection on your forefathers and loved them. And he chose you, their descendants, above all the nations, as it is today. Circumcise your hearts, therefore, and do not be stiff-necked any longer. Because the Torah is written on the hearts of all who truly name the name of Yeshua as Lord and Savior, it is meant to be followed to the best of our ability. We have no reason for fear of condemnation or the trappings of legalism. My name is Ariel ben-Lyman, HaNaviy. The intro and outro song were written, produced, and performed by Ryan Kingsley. For more information on contacting Ryan, you can reach me by email at yeshua613@hotmail.com. That's YESHUA613@hotmail.com. Or visit our website at graftedin.com. That's graftedin.com.